car doesn't feel like an AMG to me. This feels much more like an M car, and that's a real positive attribute as far as I'm concerned. I love AMGs, but they've always missed out on that sort of motorsport accuracy that M cars have had. But this thing is razor sharp. The gearbox, gear shifts, very, very quick, up and down. And the engine, some people are going to complain about this engine and say that it doesn't sound AMG enough. There's a sort of falseness to it, a bit like the last M5. It sounds a little synthesized, almost more like a sort of V10 at times than a V8. But there's no denying how effective it is for throttle response and for just pouring power to all four wheels. Yeah, not driven anything like it. It makes an RS6 feel a bit sluggish. I'll say that again, an RS6 sluggish. And that thing feels like, yeah, that feels like it's going to take off half the time. So what have we got here? Well, at the moment, I'm in a four-wheel drive saloon car with over 600 horsepower on the new Michelin Pilot Sport 4 tyre, which is pretty exceptional, it has to be said. So I've got a loaded front end grip, I've got adjustable dampers here, I'm in full stiff because we're on a circuit, which is irrelevant, I know, for most people, but that's the only place you can really drive this thing super duper fast. I've got my gearbox in manual and I've got my exhaust loud. The exhaust, as you'll hear in a second, is very powerfully on downshifts. Yeah, lots of Stuttgart flatulence there. It all sounds very nice and sporty. Steering, heavy, positive. The whole car feels very together, very grippy, very fast. And I'll now turn the gubbins off, so I'll turn the ESP off. It's quite interesting what happens here. What you end up with is a car that will oversteer. You saw then just a hint of lock I had to put in. But the four-wheel drive system is unlike anything else I've driven in a really good way too. Fundamentally, this car feels rear-wheel drive. And then just at the moment that it thinks it wants to go faster and get out of the corner, it throws a load of torque at the front wheels. Now that might sound familiar because that's exactly what the Nissan GT-R's been doing for, well, 20 years. But this feels more natural because I don't actually have to fight the car with any steering lock at all. And if I've got some opposite lock on, it seems to delay the moment that it throws more torque to the front wheels. It's so intuitive. I suppose in practice it works like a Ferrari FF's four-wheel drive system. But again, it's just better calibrated and it happens more intuitively and smoother. I think it's so clever. If I just get on the gas now, look what happens. Car oversteers and then goes to the front wheels, drags itself out. It's brilliantly simple, and the way that it deploys the power, well, visually, have a look at this now on the camera. You'll see the difference between a drift and the four-wheel drive mode. But this is where these guys have really changed the game. We've now got a car that's all-wheel drive for all-weather, four-wheel drive RS6 bashing if you're a saloon and an estate version, don't forget. But the RS6 can't slide around, and that's where, yeah, this car's got an extra trick up its sleeve. Watch this. As long as my doors are closed, I'm in manual mode, I've got the ESP off, and I've got the exhaust on, everything like that. If I pull these two paddles now, it offers me something called drift mode. I now confirm with an up dash on the paddle there, and I now have drift mode active. I now have a completely rear-wheel drive, over 600 horsepower saloon car, i.e. I have an old school AMG. How cool is that? And this is no kind of, we'll let the front wheels come in when they fancy it. This is genuinely locked off. Nothing's going to the front tyres now at all. AMG says this is for track use only. Well, I'm on a track, so let's see what it'll do. So this is now third gear in a hairpin. Yeah, that feels like all drive. And I've just laid two black lines for about half the length of the straight. This thing is superb. I just love the breadth of it. So when you want a grippy four-wheel drive car, you've got one. And when you want to, yeah, behave like an idiot, pull two Spaniels' ears, and away you go. This is a fourth gear left-hander. No, can't do that in an RS6. So do you understand just how capable this thing is? It can be the perfect yobbo, and it can be the perfect civilized all-weather performance car. Never driven anything like it. Brakes, this is on steels. They've not faded too much today, but it's a big 2-ton saloon car, so of course they're going to run out at some point. The cabin, we'll talk about that a bit more on the road. In fact, we probably should go to the public highway to test this thing in its correct environment. But on a circuit, the ability to do skids, most important for me. Now on the public road, yeah, this thing is very complete indeed. Other than the fact that it tells you what the speed limit is every 4 minutes, and I'm sure I could turn that off, there is one other problem. It's the ride comfort. It's busy. This thing's been developed for very flat, virginal German asphalt, and sadly we don't have much of that in the UK, so this thing's busy. I reckon it's a bit less supple than an RS6, and for me that does slightly detract from the overall experience. But otherwise, seating position's great. I can get the seat good and low. It's a very, very comfortable seat with so many different positions. It's great. I love the fact that you can operate the passenger seat from the driver's seat through these controls. It's brilliant. Neil's sitting there now. I can move him backwards and forwards. If you've got kids, that is so much fun to fire your daughter's head into the windscreen as you're going along. It's great. As for the instruments and the general cabin layout, some people reckon it's not 100 grand's worth. It probably isn't, but these screens, they're huge and so clear, and there's so many different ways of tuning them to the way you want them to deliver you information. So I can't really fault them. They're fantastic, actually. The blue, red, or whatever lighting's a little bit chintzy. The IWC clock, I quite like that. Some people don't, but I'd rather have that than the Maserati clock, has to be said.
This is a whole new template for Mercedes-AMG. Gone is the old 5.5-litre twin-turbo V8, replaced by an updated version of the smaller 4-litre M178 V8 from the C-Class, still twin-turbocharged. In the S, it produces 612 horsepower and 627 foot-pounds of torque. Those are massive numbers. It drives through a new version of the MCT gearbox with 9 ratios. The rear axle is completely different to a standard E-Class, as is the semi-air suspension, just about every other mechanical aspect of the car. But the really clever bit is the 4-wheel drive system. For years, people have wanted a car that was all-wheel drive for slippery conditions and rear-driven when you want to be a wally. Well, that time's finally come. But it's worth remembering that in 2-wheel drive mode, none of the chassis electronics are there to help you. There's a clutch on the back of the gearbox and a prop shaft connecting that to the back wheels, in between which on this S model is an electronically controlled slippy diff. Leave the clutch engaged and you have 4-wheel drive. Disconnect it and you have, large tyre bills. The bodywork is 11mm wider, the body shell is stiffer. Basically, AMG has thrown the full Monty at this car.
Powertrain is superlative. I suspected it would work brilliantly on the road, and it does. When it's wet, this thing has, I think, the best 4-wheel drive system for people that want to enjoy driving that I've driven, because it feels kind of rear-wheel drive until you need some help. And when you need the magic hand to come in and just ping you up the road and chamfer out some understeer and control some oversteer, it's there for you. You just feel superhuman. The noise of the engine is a bit of a problem too for me, because it doesn't quite sound burbly and AMG enough. AMGE, is that even a word? I don't know. They've always sounded quite Mopar AMGs. There's sort of a genuine American muscle car noise to them. This doesn't. This is more flat plane, more synthesized, more European. It's a European car, that shouldn't be a problem. Tyre noise, not too bad. Ride comfort, like I said, busy. Steering, accurate. Car doesn't feel that big on the road either, which is a surprise. And the way that the open and close works on the air vents, the movement. If you find one of these in a showroom, go and play with it. It's lovely, titillating. No, this is a very, very complete, very fast machine. It needs a bigger fuel tank. Not big enough, should be 80 litres and isn't large enough. And I suspect the fuel consumption is pretty tragic when you're on it. At a cruise, it's just about acceptable, but pushing hard, I think it's going to be quite strong. But, yeah, Mercedes-AMG, well done. This is a bigger step forward than I thought you were going to make. This is a very complete car. The new M5 will have to be very, very good to beat this, but luckily we get to drive it quite soon.
Yes, it's been around a while, but we had to do something on the new G-Wagon, because somehow Mercedes has updated a car launched in 1979 and created the most desirable SUV of them all. This is the G63, a 585 horsepower lump that costs well over 120 grand and offers less space than a C-Class estate. But just try not letting this thing get under your skin. It really is impossible. The reason it now handles is some big changes to the chassis. There are now double wishbones up front, the rear axle is also more sophisticated, and the steering rack is no longer taken from a tractor. Inside, you really do get all the trimmings of an S-Class, a massive set of screens, and enough configurability, if that's even a word, to keep you and the kids amused for hours. What I love about this car is that underneath all the noise and ostentation lurks a really talented machine. Anyone can make something loud and ridiculous, but the new G63 is actually usable too, if you can afford the fuel bills.
Okay, before we talk about what this thing's like to drive on the track, can we acknowledge that we're even on a track? Because this thing shouldn't be here. I know it's a bit incongruous and I'm being deliberately naughty because it looks so funny on the track. But the last G-Wagon would not be able to do this. I wouldn't be able to talk and drive like this because I'd be off in the scenery with Neil sitting next to me trying to find my teeth, or me trying to find his teeth. His teeth are a bit odd actually, if you looked at them. Anyhow, what's this thing like on a track? It's obviously a complete joke, but it stops and it turns in and it goes round corners. The old one couldn't do that. It really couldn't. This is surprisingly good. On a drying track, I wouldn't want to get the stopwatch out, but it's pretty damn good, you know. The ESP is very, very cautious, so it cuts the thing and means you don't get all the torque that you want. But once you get it up and running, well, there's a cut, then it goes. And then what you do is you just fling it to the apex with as much steering lock as you dare, and then just manage the understeer to the outside of the circuit. There is no oversteer. It's been developed quite clearly to never oversteer. So the outside front tyre is the one that gives up the ghost the first by quite some margin. But you know what? You really can get it round this lap quite quickly at Landau. It must look ridiculous from the outside. It hops over the curbs. The engine is magnificent. The gearbox is pretty good. I mean, it's strolling on at well over 100 up the main straight there. God, they've done the number on this. So, there we go. That was mainly the excuse for me to come to Landau and throw a G-Wagon around. What you really need to know is how good this car is on the road. On the road, this car is little short of a revelation compared to the previous car. I must stop talking about the previous car, but I suppose it's the only context I have. The G-Wagon sort of stands alone. You don't buy a G-Wagon or a Range Rover or a Q7, SQ7, whatever you call them. You just want a G-Wagon, or you don't really, do you? Because you've been taught, a bit like a Defender, that owning a G-Wagon means you put up with its foibles, with all the things that are obviously wrong about it, for the upside, which is the joy of the way it looks and what it stands for and the fact that you pretend you're a Russian gangster. That's why people buy them, isn't it? So they can burble around pretending they've got a gun on them, when most people in Northern Europe have just got a copy of the newspaper on them. So that's why you want one of these, but now you don't have any of the shortcomings. The only shortcoming you have now is that it costs a lot of money to buy, 150 grand with some toys on it. But, and I really do feel totally ashamed to admit this, it's worth it. There is nothing else like this car. There really isn't. It's so good on road now. The fairly rudimentary suspension system's been uprated, so we now have a, you know, pretty much a unitary body. But it rides in such a lovely manner. It still feels a bit live axle-y, which some people really quite like, because you get that sense of connection and you really feel the axles working. But every single sharp edge now has a lovely roundness to it. So it sort of hits things, gives you a bit of a wobble, and then it just smooths them all out. It's really, really pleasant to be in. You sit high, the throttle response is really good. You just wobble along. And when you want to go quick, it's good. You know, it rolls a bit, but it grips. The steering's not too slow. If you went and drove a last generation BMW X5, this isn't that far off that in handling terms. It really isn't. And that is remarkable. You've got a vertical windscreen, which should mean that you get loads of wind noise, but the wind noise is quite well contained. The driving position is superb. The seat is superb. The quality of the cabin is out of the top drawer. And the whole thing is charming. It just reeks of charm. I like being in this thing. It makes me smile. The fact that I'm sitting inside a very, very expensive box on wheels makes me feel good. Some people respond well to it. Other people think you're the aforementioned Russian gangster, which doesn't always help with local relations, let's say. But I like the way that it flows down the road. I like the way that it rides. I like the way that you can drive it moderately quickly. In other words, the G63 is usable every day as a normal, fast car. Now, you might have seen a couple of weeks ago on the internet that RM Auctions was dealing with a sale of around 130 cars from the 70s, 80s and 90s. And I saw the pictures of those cars in that warehouse and thought, I've got to see them. Guess where we are? We're with them. This is, and I don't say this lightly, the most extraordinary room full of cars I've ever seen. Look at these. We've got SLs and SECs. It's an E500. Look how sexy it is with the slightly flared arches. This comes from a time when people understood quietly demonstrating your potential, you know? C126 AMGs. So that's basically the big Merc Coupé from the mid-80s with the wide arch body kit. I mean, it's just the signature thug car, isn't it? It couldn't look better. Come and have a look inside this. Because the 80s was the decade of excess, and the 80s wasn't smug with hindsight. The 80s was proud to be the 80s, and the 80s loved buttons. This seat has 13 buttons alone, this one seat. That means there's 26 across the two of them. And the dashboards, and the clock faces, and the... You know, when it all goes electric soon, I think I might want one of these. I've never done this before, but I'm taking photos myself, so you just go and film something else. Now, I did your deal. We're going to go to the estate car, and I never thought I'd say this. I'm about to walk straight past a 300 SEL 6.3. I won't look at that, because that is one of my dream cars, but we need to ignore that to get to that. That is a W123 Touring estate car, and it's been to AMG, and it has a 5-litre engine in it, which would have been from an S-Class. You might know of a cooler car on the planet than that, but I don't. Look at it. Yes, so that's an SL70, the bored out version by AMG, and that engine became the basis of the, come on, answers on a postcard? You're right. That became the engine that went in the Zonda. And these are now worth a few quid because there aren't any more Zonda engines, so the only way to get a Zonda engine is to buy one of these and do something unspeakable to it. I wonder if you could just sort of live here, have a tent or a motorhome in the middle and just hang out with them. Everyone knows what an S63 is. It's Mercedes' big four-door saloon car that will go a zillion miles an hour. But very few people know about this car. It's the S63 Coupe, and it's kind of forgotten amongst the hordes of Porsches and Lamborghinis and Bentleys that operate in that price range. But I'm telling you, this might be one of the best cars on sale. Now, of course, it's not cheap. It's well over £100,000, and with options, I don't want to admit how much this one is, but it's the most beautiful product. Everything in here is of the very best quality. It's on a shortened S-Class chassis with air suspension and their familiar 5.5 litre twin turbocharged V8, which has now been replaced by the 4 litre twin turbocharged V8 from the E63. It's confusing, I know. But I'm telling you, I don't know of a car that better combines speed and comfort, and I've driven every car that's supposed to do it. So how has Mercedes made such a brilliant car and failed to tell everyone about it? Now, this is quite an old car. In fact, it feels like a used car review now, but the engine is the old school twin turbocharged V8, 5.5 litres, 585 horsepower and 664 foot-pounds of torque. It's a torque monster. The gearbox is a bit slower than it now is, but I tell you, this is the powertrain of choice for this type of car. And with the shorter wheelbase than an S-Class, it's a much, much more agile machine. I cannot tell you how well balanced it is between comfort and speed. On UK roads, this is the most impressive GT car I've ever driven. I'll tell you what makes it so good. It's just the level of comfort, quietness, and general feeling of not actually being in a car. But that demonstrates quite a big problem when you're making car videos, because there's no way of me saying, listen to how quiet it is. Well, I'll do it now. That's my isn't it quiet face. I'll now do my ride comfort face. I mean, the ride comfort is freakish. I've never driven a car like it. You see stuff, your eyes say, ooh, that's a bump, and when you go over it, nothing happens. You get a little noise like that, and nothing happens. The cumulative effect of that silence and that ride comfort is that you normally get out after a 3-hour journey fresher than when you started. That doesn't happen in an Audi A8. That doesn't happen in a BMW 7 Series. It only happens in this car. And when you think about it, when you're stressed and you've got lots to do, that's an incredible trick. But alongside the freakish levels of comfort and lack of fatigue, this car is riddled with toys. In fact, there's so much fun to be had poking around the details of this car that I'm gonna have to stop and show you. The S63 Coupe is all about the details. It's often accused of looking just like a slightly bigger C-Class or E-Class Coupe, but it doesn't. Look at these lights here. Those are individual LEDs, and above them are Swarovski crystals. This thing reads the road ahead. That's why it says LED Intelligent Light System. Don't get that on a C-Class. No, you don't. Come round the side here. Now, the next time you see one of these on the road, if you do, because they're quite rare, look at that line down the side, this sort of swage line. It starts in front of the front wheel and it comes all the way back, one line uninterrupted, all the way back to behind the rear wheel. And it gives this lovely tension down the side of the car. I think it's fantastic. It doesn't have spoiler arches, but it still looks really wide and punchy. The boot lid has this ductile here that's built into the metalwork, and that does act as a spoiler and produces, well, reduces lift, okay? What I love is this extra crease here. So the line follows off the boot lid, and the rear panel here, this rear quarter panel, just has this little hint of a crease here, just to taper that line in. It's that level of detail that I find fascinating about this car. Because people think it's just a big Mercedes Coupe. It isn't. It's totally separate to all the rest of the range. That's why the little elements in the rear heated screen are so small, they're invisible. They're not on a normal Mercedes. This is a reminder of the fact that Mercedes-Benz has always been a maker of the finest cars in the world, and they can be quite expensive. Now, any great luxury car cabin should be full of toys and things to play with, and this is one of the best. I think of all the features I've enjoyed during 17,000 miles of living with this car, this is my favourite. The driver can control the passenger seat. Effectively, it's like being in a DB5 and pretending you're James Bond. So you press left and you can just move your passenger backwards, forwards, up, down. Look, I'll just say to the ceiling. Now, if you've got little people, children, there's nothing better than winding them up by just sending them up and down and around. You can also control their heated seat and you control their air scarf. This thing has the fan heater that comes into your neck like it does in an SL. So effectively you can warm and cool the other person in the car in the front with you as much as you like. I love that. It's totally unnecessary, but it's just great, great theatre. The seats themselves, well, they couldn't be better. Let's move that out of the way for the camera. Sorry about that, Chris. Let's move that for you. Hold on. There we go. Just demonstrating again the brilliance of the S-Class Coupe. The seat itself is so adjustable. I'll leave it to Neil to show you what happens on the screen, but you can have everything from active bolsters, passive bolsters, move everything's in and out, up, down, around, about. It is truly remarkable. If you can't get comfortable in this car, you can't get comfortable in any car. The only problem is, if you're a short ass like me, by the time you find the right driving position, some of the dials become obscured. In fact, they're pretty much cut off by the top of the steering wheel, but that doesn't matter because there's a head-up display that I can read on the screen, so that's fine. I just use the HUD. There are two main screens here, like there is in an S-Class. I can't really fault the level of information. It is clear, precise, not too fancy, but just enough theatre to make me feel I'm in something very expensive. The leather, look at the leather. This baseball glove, thick Desenio brown leather is fantastic. Other details I love, the Swarovski crystals. I almost said Swarovski, right? I'm not going to try it again. There's one here, okay? There's a crystal that sits on your cubby there when you open it, which I find, it's a bit naff really, isn't it? I'm not that into crystals. The centre armrest thing here is brilliant. This is classic Mercedes-Benz brilliant because it opens both sides, but it does so the same way. How's that even possible when there's no visible hinge? I mean, what? It's snake oil, isn't it? It's incredible. These open here to give you a cup holder. The other thing I love is that you fold that down and that's where you get your CD out. But it does mean that you can't drink a drink and take a CD out at the same time, which is an enormous failure for Mercedes-Benz, and I hope they look at that for the facelift. What else have we got? All your buttons down here for your chassis controls, for your gearbox to be sport, manual or comfort. But most important of all is a little sign here on the tweeter. All the speaker covers are metal. There's one up there for the surround sound. There's a few around here. The Burmester hi-fi in this thing is the best hi-fi I've ever heard in a car. There are subs down in the footwells, and then the top end comes sort of seamlessly out above the scuttle there. It sounds incredible. It's such a compromised environment. And I know that there are companies like Name that I love for home hi-fi, making car highs for other car manufacturers and making lots of noise about it. Mercedes doesn't make any noise, any PR noise about the hi-fi in this car at all, but it is unquestionably the best I've ever heard in a car. So the combination of silence, ride comfort, and sitting like you're in a live music auditorium makes for the most compelling long-distance vehicle I've ever been in. There's enough room for two little people in the back. I wouldn't say it's a genuine full four-seater, which is remarkable given it casts a shadow that of a 5 Series, or a bit more. But if you have the seats a bit further forward, you can get two grown-ups in the back, but not really long ones. You wouldn't want to do long journeys with them. The boot's a decent size, and the rear seats are heated as well. Bum warmers are critical, I think. As you can tell, I'm a bit enthusiastic about it. I love it. I've lived with this thing for a long time, and I think it's amazing. Anyhow, enough of the static review. Let's head back out onto the road. The next S63 Coupe trick is size shrinking. This thing is a big, heavy old boat. But once you start threading it down a road, you wouldn't believe how small it can feel. It never feels as small as a 3 Series, but you can really pound it down a road. And of course, that air suspension, its compliance helps you when the surface gets choppy. Mid-corner bumps, not a problem whatsoever. You just keep pushing, it keeps building speed. And you can actually enjoy driving it fast. I mean that, you really can. In fact, it's so good to drive fast, you can even do this with it.
There's something so naughty about big, fast cars being driven in a silly fashion. So let me just be quiet for a minute and let you watch a well over 2-ton Mercedes-Benz sliding around a wet circuit somewhere in Wales, because to me it just looks magnificent.
It's just the best car no one's
ever heard of. I like doing this. I've just completely f***ed the rear tyres there.
Now, it's been a while since I did an intro to a film, scrabbling up a 1 in 3 incline with boulders everywhere. But I'm in a new Mercedes G500 squared, not our usual tipple. However, take a look at this now and you'll understand why we felt we had to do a film on it. Because, well, just look at it. Because despite being the ultimate pose wagon, I mean, let's face it, you wouldn't even look at the Aventador if you saw one of these behind it. This is a very, very serious piece of off-road kit. So we got twin coilovers at each corner, and we've got portal axles which allow crazy axle articulation and this ridiculous ride height. So this thing has got a ground clearance of 450 millimeters, and it will wade to a meter. It feels a lot more sophisticated in terms of its ride comfort. I mean, obviously I'm being thrown around now, than a normal G-Class. Quite looking forward to getting it on the road, because I suspect it might actually be a better, more sophisticated car than standard G. There is, however, a price to pay for this excellence, and it's somewhere between £250,000 and 300,000, depending on how you spec it. Yes, this is a fearsomely expensive car, but then what else could you have that can match this? This is a factory fresh Mercedes G-Wagon that looks like it's been done up by some lunatics in Finland. What a thing. I'm going to find myself a big steep slope to go down. Watch this. Here we go. Now remember your basic off-roading. Keep your thumbs outside the wheel. Tip it over the edge. Remember, it's only 300 grand. And then just let it roll down the hill. You can't do this in normal cars. And the engine, well, that's effectively a detuned C63 motor. 420-ish horsepower, 450 foot-pounds of torque. Let's do a bit of wading. It loves a bit of wading. I don't want to get my quilted leather wet, do I? It's got 3 diff locks like a G-Wagon, so you can lock front, centre and rear. The ESP, that's interesting. You can turn it off, because obviously I wanted to come and do some massive slides, but it really doesn't give you any kind of leeway. If you have one intervention, it switches back on completely, so that's sort of the fun police really are at work here. But the combination of those diffs, portal axles, ground clearance, and if you wanted to do the silly off-road tyres, means I think you could go anywhere. So, genuinely my first exploratory few miles on the road in this thing. My bottom, the sensitive testing device underneath my torso, tells me that this thing rides 50% better than a normal G-Wagon. It's really nice and supple. You think, looking at it from the outside, this would be an absolute shambles to drive on the road. But it's not, because the G63 and G65, they just feel a bit absurd, really. And every time you clog it, a light comes on and it just slows you down. There'll be a traction control warning light that says no, or 9, cut off and cop. And in this car, you can just clog it like I did then, and there's no worries, it just goes. So about 420 horsepower, 450 foot-pounds of torque, pushing 3 tons. It's not a massive power-to-weight ratio, but this thing is quite sprightly. 6.5 seconds to 60 around there, and 130 flat out. I'm not sure I believe that. And also, if you do 130 miles an hour in a G-Wagon, from my experience, in the summer, you can do it for about 2 minutes before the screen is just a insect and aphid graveyard. Let's do a bit of engine noise. Where's there a sign that says, there's one of those signs that says, do engine noise. Bear with me. Bear with me. I think the only sign more shocking than the G500 squared would be it coming past you when you did this. Right, here we go. So kick down. Sounds wicked. I'd say its turn of speed is rude. For the way it looks, that's a rude fast car. Shouldn't be that quick. The ride in here is kind of Range Rover Sport, but no more than that, and miles better than any G-Wagon I've ever driven. there you go. Fit portal axles and great big off-road equipment and twin coilovers on each corner so you can go off-road, and you make a nicer road car. Funny old world. I mean, the only difficulty is getting in and out of it if you're like me and not of average height. But look around. Cabin's lovely. Always surprised how small and intimate G-Wagons are. They're not very big things. Lavished with quilted leather and Alcantaras and carbon. I mean, you need carbon in your 3-ton SUV, don't you? But no, this is a impressive road car. I thought it would be hopeless, but it's better than a standard Jeep. What a wonderfully absurd car.
So the G500 squared is perfectly engineered, quite outrageous, and boy does it make you smile.